I've made a ton of different batches of mead, and a lot of them are experimental, but some of them turn out really good. And one recipe that I keep coming back to is this blueberry maple. Everybody that tries it seems to love it. It's got a good blend of fruit and spice. I think it's delicious, but I'm going to show you exactly how to make it so that you can try it yourself. It's a pretty wild feeling when you realize you can grab fruit, honey, syrup, or pretty much anything with sugar and turn it into alcohol, especially when you find a recipe that's legitimately really good. It's like discovering you have a superpower. Making this 15% blueberry maple mead from start to finish is actually easier than you probably think for how good it tastes, and I'm going to show you every step of the way. First step, sanitize. Not clean, sanitize. There is a difference, and you have to use Star San or any food grade sanitizer actually made for brewing, and you'll be good. Now, it doesn't matter what type of equipment you're using. Brewing is scrappy. You can brew out of a toilet bowl if you really want to. Video coming soon. I'm using my kit, but you can make this recipe with whatever you have. Now for 1 gallon, we're going to start with 3 pounds of blueberries. I am using these frozen blueberries from Target because that is all I had access to at the time of putting this together, but there's actually nothing wrong with using frozen fruit. A lot of people actually prefer it for brewing. Next, get the berries in a bowl, grab a masher, and get to town. Pro tip, use a potato masher. They work surprisingly well and they're like $5. Next step, add the fruit. The fermenter I'm using is 1 1/4 gallons, so I can fit all the berries inside. Make sure you're careful when you do this or you can end up with a big blueberry mess like me, but it's all good, accidents happen, and if I showed you all the bloopers you'd wonder how I ever get anything done in the first place. If you want to use a 1 gallon carboy, you won't have enough space for all this fruit because it'll get foamy and messy and you want the extra head space. So one workaround for this is to just use the juice from the berries instead, that way there's less volume. Once the fruit is added, set it aside, and now on to the fun part. I'm using this 100% pure Wisconsin maple syrup as well as this raw wildflower honey. For the syrup, I added about 1 pound and then 2 pounds of honey. The only reason I am adding them to a separate container like you see here is just so that it's easier to mix. Honey can be a pain to dissolve sometimes, but then you can add it to the fermenter and top it off with water. How much water? Just enough to leave a few inches of headspace from the top. The more the better because you'll lose some volume from the fruit. Now yeast. Yeast eat sugar and make alcohol. They live good lives. You need to rehydrate your yeast, get them up and at them and ready to make alcohol. Here's how to do it. 25 milliliters of hot water, 95 to 98 degrees Fahrenheit, stir in 2.5 grams of yeast, half a packet, let it sit for 20 minutes, boom, you're done. With the hard work the yeast put in, it would be a shame to not give them what they need, so we will also be adding yeast nutrient. Here is what I recommend for best results. 1.5 grams of Fermentation yeast nutrient at the start, so now, and then another 1.5 grams after 24 and 48 hours. 3 doses total. The yeast will thank you, figuratively speaking, and I guess maybe literally, depending on your drinking habits. The white powder I put in is pectic enzyme. 1.5 grams of that will help break down pectin in your fruit so that your mead doesn't get all hazy. By the way, once again, you can add the ingredients individually directly to the fermenter, but it's just harder to mix in, and that's why I'm using this jar. Now let's check the gravity. If you're new here, this is how we eventually determine alcohol conversion. Gravity is actually just the specific density of the liquid, basically how much sugar is in here that can be fermented. We are at 1.11, and I'll show you how we use that in just a little bit. So now this is going to ferment for the next couple weeks, and while it ferments, it makes gas. We need a way for that gas to escape, and that's where this airlock comes in. Keep it at room temperature, out of direct sunlight, and let it do its thing. It'll bubble like crazy while it ferments, and unfortunately I forgot to film this batch, but it should look something like this. Eventually it'll stop bubbling and you'll get excited because you'll think it's done, but the only way to actually see if it's totally done is to take more gravity measurements until that number stops changing. So it's been a little over a month since I put this blueberry maple mead together, and today we're gonna try it out, measure the gravity, see if it's done, and talk about the next steps. Please excuse my extreme awkwardness, I am clearly still working on my camera presence. The first thing I'd say is just by looking at it is you can tell the color's gotten a lot darker and it's almost perfectly clear already, which I'll show you more in a second. I can't wait to taste it and see if it needs any adjustments. So the main benefit of using a brew bag is I can just remove all of the fruit at once. Super easy. Ooh, that smells strong. Really fruity though, it just kind of burns your nose, but it's good. It smells like a wine. So for this leftover blueberry mash, you don't have to throw this away. I actually made a video where I take what's left over and made like a blueberry fruit leather, and it turned out really good. So you can also compost it too, so don't let it go to waste. Back to the mead. We can see we have well over a gallon, almost a full gallon and a quarter. We're gonna have plenty to bottle, which is nice, but I'm not sure if we're gonna bottle right yet. First, we have to measure the gravity and just confirm that it's done fermenting. When I take the original gravity at the start of the batch, I usually use a baster like this to pull samples rather than using the spigot, just because I don't want sugary liquid going through the spigot and then sitting for a month. Whereas now I'm more comfortable using the spigot now that it's mostly alcohol and not much sugar there, so it should be fine. So wow, yeah, it's totally done fermenting. It got well below 1.0, and then because the density of alcohol is less than that of water, that's why that's possible. But it looks like we're sitting at about, call it 0.993. But now what I want to do is have a taste to see if any adjustments are needed and kind of where we're at. You never know exactly what a mead is going to be like, how long it's going to take until you actually taste it. So let's see. It's really good. So even though I used maple syrup, I actually don't taste any maple here. So maple doesn't usually stick around that well. The blueberry flavor's there. And I definitely can tell that it was made with blueberry skins because I can feel those tannins. Zero sweetness whatsoever. No residual sugars, not even perceived sweetness from the fruit. It's like a bold red wine, but I don't want to sound like I'm some master taster. I honestly haven't been doing this that long, but I know what I like and what I don't like. And what I think this might be missing is like a little bit of spice or something to make it a little bit more complex. So I am leaning towards adding a bit of cinnamon based on what my French toast mead turned out to be. So yeah, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add a cinnamon stick, taste it every few days, pull it out when it's ready. Then I'm gonna stabilize and back sweeten with just a little bit of maple syrup. I think if we can get some maple notes present combined with the cinnamon and blueberry, that'll go together really well. So we'll give that a try and then reevaluate in a few days. One thing I also wanted to do is compare this to the other blueberry maple batch that I made. If you remember, I made this one with the full blueberries, and then I also made this batch which just used the blueberry juice. So I'm curious to see if there's any difference in taste. Wow. Totally different. So the one with just the blueberry juice actually, for some reason, has more blueberry flavor, and I'm not sure why. It could just be that since there were no skins, the blueberry seeds too, it doesn't have that bitterness and the tannins. I think I still like this one better. Now on to making some adjustments. As I noted, I threw in 1 cinnamon stick and stabilized. I recommend half a gram of potassium metabisulfite, then 24 hours later, 1.5 grams of potassium sorbate. This is sort of the gold standard for brewing, and it prevents further fermentation so that you can add more sugar and it won't ferment away. I removed the cinnamon after about 3 days and added some additional maple syrup to taste. There's no scientific way to do this aside from just adding a little bit, tasting it, and adding more until the flavors are balanced to your liking. Just make sure you start small and also account for the added volume. I aged this for another whole month, mostly just so it could clear up before bottling. Before I sweetened, I totally could have racked or transferred it to another vessel to age, and that might have helped it clear up faster. I honestly didn't need it. It's actually totally clear. I can see right through it, and it's only been a few weeks since I back sweetened, so there's no reason why I can't just bottle directly from this vessel. Like every step of the process, sanitization is key, and bottling might be the most important time to make sure you're doing it adequately. It would suck to make a great batch and have it go to waste inside your bottles. Now listen to me get excited about filling bottles of mead. Filling bottles is usually one of the trickier parts of the brewing process, and so one thing that I wanted to do to try to make it easier is to add these bottle fillers to my kits. You can just add this end directly to your vessel, and this end just helps control the flow of liquid. It's spring-loaded, and so liquid will only come out when you push down, and it'll stop when you pull up. So it's really easy to control the liquid level inside the bottles, and you don't make a mess doing it. One thing also, before you do this, make sure you take out the airlock. You need this open on top so the liquid can actually flow out. So one thing I like to do before I actually put mead in bottles is get a little bit in a cup to just try to purge whatever was in the spigot. Once purged and prepared, off you go and filling your bottles, and the end is almost here. But there are still a couple important things to note to make sure your mead stays good and can stand the test of time. I was able to get just over 6 bottles worth of mead, which is actually a great yield. Now to seal my bottles, I will be using corks that I give a quick dunk in sanitizer, and then move on to using the most satisfying tool in the world called a corker. Now with my gravity measurements and considering the volume of maple syrup I added, the final estimated ABV for this batch was about 14.5%, and I do like to note that on the labels. If you follow this recipe, you'll probably end up with something similar. The nice thing is you could always adjust the honey if you want there to be slightly more or less alcohol, and then obviously you can sweeten to your liking. There's a reason why everybody likes this one. Even though I usually prefer the drier meads, I think back sweetening with the maple syrup really helps kind of separate this from other ones. And if it's got maple, I feel like it needs that sweetness. This one's really good. This is one of my favorite recipes ever. If you had any questions about the process or anything at all, let me know in the comments. I'm not sure what I'm gonna make next. I have a few ideas, but I always take requests, so let me know if there's something in particular that you wanna see. But thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.